This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hi, I'm Constance Duke, Director of Sustainability at Sustain.Life.
I'm Hannah Sofsky, Sustainability Data Analyst at Sustain.Life.
All right, so this week in climate news, it's been quite a downer from, the mass fish die-offs in Texas due to rising ocean temperatures to record levels of greenhouse gas emissions again. There was some news about the electric grid in the US likely not being ready for a full renewable energy transition. So quite a bit of bad news, but undoubtedly the Canadian wildfires dominated the news cycle. And of course, a lot of people's lives over the past 2 weeks. So these fires started in British Columbia and Alberta in late April, but then they expanded to record areas in May and June. Hannah, do you want to give a quick recap on the cause of these fires?
Of course, in the case of huge fires that we're seeing in Canada, asking what caused them kind of breaks into two questions. If we first have what event physically sparked this fire, and then what's causing this fire to be so aggressive. In Canada, half of wildfires are started by lightning, and the other half are started by a variety of human activities. There's the usual suspects like cigarette butts and unattended campfires. And then, there's also there was a fire in New Brunswick that was sparked by an ATV catching on fire. So equipment malfunctions are absolutely in this basket. And then the second question of what conditions are responsible for fires becoming so increasingly destructive, this is the question that points to climate change. Canada has had a warmer and drier spring than expected, which left forests more vulnerable to spreading fires. And these hotter and drier conditions also breed more lightning. So anthropogenic climate change is creating both the conditions for more fires to start and then to spread more successfully once started.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is the causes are humans and humans. And
Yes.
coincidentally, the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences released a study this week too, confirming that the increase in those catastrophic wildfires that we've seen in California over the past 10 years is entirely attributable to climate change. And one thing that turned the Canadian fires into such a huge story, probably more so maybe than the comparably horrible fires in California and Oregon in 2020, was the air quality impact on the East Coast. We've obviously seen a lot of apocalyptic images in the news of these orange skies in New York City and Washington, D.C., and other areas. And then our own team in New York City was directly impacted by the poor air quality. And this happened because there was this large low pressure system that had been sitting over Maine for some time, kind of blocking the smoke from being blown straight east. And at the same time, the system had this counterclockwise kind of conveyor belt wind that directed the smoke south to the US East Coast. On the West Coast, we're kind of not new to this. We've had our entire homes covered in ash. We're constantly checking air quality reports during wildfire season. Do you think now that the other side of the country has experienced, even if only for a few days, the public health implications of wildfires, that the conversation about climate change is shifting? Or will things just kind of go back to business as usual as the air clears, at least for the moment, because there's no telling that this is actually the end of it?
Right. This is tough. There are so many reasons that people become involved in the climate movement, however you define it, and some people are absolutely motivated by personal experiences, and some aren't. But I hope that this deepened the East Coast's understanding of exactly how climate change can impact their lives and their health.
Mhm.
And we saw a really beautiful knowledge exchange between the West Coast and the
True.
East Coast. People teaching each other how to seal their homes and how to make sort of makeshift air purifiers and also just their favorite store-bought options. I wish it didn't take firsthand experience to understand what the West Coast has known for so long. But I do hope oh, this is what you've been experiencing reaction is meaningful. I sort of hope the sympathy was extended, not just to the West Coast, but to Canadians.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure that we don't understate what our Canadian neighbors are dealing with. I mean, we're talking thousands of people displaced. I read 30,000 somewhere, billions of dollars in damage, obviously the destructions of homes, businesses, and infrastructure. And there's also no hope that the fires will be extinguished anytime soon, and kind of setting this up to be Canada's worst fire season on record. And unfortunately, scientists expect this trend to continue in general. Let's maybe share some of the jaw-dropping stats that we've seen this week. One that stood out to me was that by the end of the century, climate change could double the acreage burned by wildfires each year in Canada, which is, of course, a serious risk to public health. But Canada also has a huge timber economy that will take a major hit from that. Did you come across anything mind-boggling?
Yeah, it was difficult to come across anything that wasn't mind-boggling. There were
Agreed.
400 blazes burning across
Mhm.
Canada last Wednesday, and this is a really early start to Canada's fire season. I'm startled to see that it is both earlier and so much more aggressive.
Mhm.
In 2019, 2020, and 2022, the burned area never surpassed 2 million hectares. In 2021, records were set, but still it was shy of 4 million hectares. This year's fires shot past 4 million hectares within its first month. So, yeah, we're not expecting this to be a fluke year. The UN
Mhm.
estimates that wildfires globally are going to increase in intensity by 57% by 2090. So, we're only starting to see how dangerous this kind of new normal could be.
Yeah, agreed. Since you mentioned those 400 blazes, last Wednesday is when that happened. That was actually Canada's Clean Air Day, ironically. Not to mention that the climate change conference in Bonn, Germany, kicked off just 2 days earlier, last Monday. And if there were, any type of silver lining to all this, I'd love for it to be just an appropriate sense of urgency during those climate talks. Some politicians, as we know, including Ontario's premier, have refused to make the link between climate change and this year's fires. What are we hearing from scientists?
Scientists are really rightfully stepping out in opposition to politicians and bearing down on the undeniable risk between climate change and these worsening fire seasons. You brought up a paper published just this week from the national proceedings of
Hmm.
the National Academy of Sciences. And this study took climatic drivers, non-climatic drivers, and natural variability into account and still concluded that anthropogenic climate change contributed to 172% increase in burned area of California. These kinds of studies teach us that there's no other logical combatant to
Hmm.
worsening fires than decarbonizing. And not to mention, one of those non-climatic drivers, specifically in California, is an aging grid. And transitioning to a renewable grid and repairing the one that we've got looks like a kind of two birds, one stone solution. And scientists also, in reaction to last week, hopped on Twitter to explain things like vapor pressure deficit and what that means. So much of the climate crisis, at least in my opinion, is an education crisis. And some of the power of social media in these moments is to teach people that are experiencing something really scary exactly what's going on and kind of what they can be getting involved in to do something about it. And in the same vein, public health experts also capitalized on last week to really emphasize the human health risks of, yes, fires, but the climate change in general. New Yorkers kind of already know that they're not breathing like the best air, but it's a fantastic chance to remind people that there are health implications of the fossil fuel economy, even when it's not orange outside.
Yeah, agreed. I also really like your point about the education crisis. I would also say it's a communications issue.
Absolutely.
Where we're seeing a lot of scientists kind of correcting the stories that are coming out in the media now. That's not supposed to be their job, right? We need to interpret the science properly, and so we need more science journalists to do that job really well. So yeah, there's obviously aggressive and strategic climate action that we need to take to first and foremost phase out fossil fuels and to stop, exacerbating these conditions that make wildfires like these more and more extreme and more likely. And in the meantime, if you would like to help, the Canadian Red Cross and Firefighters Without Borders are a couple of organizations that you can donate to. As always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week for more stories in sustainability.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.